Tonight it's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Janheinz Jahn, social anthropologist, lecturer, author, and founder of the Research Center on Neo-African Culture. Mr. Jahn is internationally known for his studies on new culture in Africa, which has resulted from a combination of traditional and new influences. Mr. Jahn has lectured on a wide range of topics dealing with Africa and Africans, including some on African literature, philosophy, art, and music. Here at UCLA, he has given a series of lectures, of which this is the concluding one. Mr. Jahn is the author of many books. One of these, titled Muntu, an outline of Neo-African culture, has been translated into 7 languages and, of course, has a worldwide distribution. This evening, Mr. Jahn will lecture on the Negro spiritual and its African background. Mr. Jahn.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Negro spiritual, the blues, and the jazz are among the most well-known and most famous expressions of American culture. In Europe, if we think about American culture, we think in first line of spiritual, blues, and jazz. When in the 70s of the last century, the first group of singers, the Fisk Jubilee singers, came over to Europe, they were introduced in quite a special way. They had an enormous success, but it was believed that there something quite original and quite new had happened, which so far Europe did not know and had never heard of. A special kind of music, a special kind of singing, and it was believed that this music just sprung up somehow, without any roots, just the expression of suppressed people who, as it was put in the posters, got their consolation by an inspiration of God to do something new. Since then, quite a time has passed, and many investigations have been done into spiritual and blues, and in jazz, of course, too. In the United States, most of the investigations were biographic. It was told how people came to play music, how they came to sing. And the analysis of the style was specially based on the sociological background. Quite useful information was given in this way, but the information did not say all. It lacked to answer the question why other suppressed people in the world did not create a similar kind of music. So the social background, slavery, frustration, all that is quite one line of explanation, but it didn't say all. And as in America especially, the attitude tends to be rather ahistoric, history not being very much valued. It was believed that the Africans shipped over to the New World would have left their cultural luggage on the boats. So, in most of the explanations and descriptions of this kind of music and poetry, it is done as if from the African side there would be only little contribution. Certainly, something specific is stated, but it is less linked to African culture than, especially in this country here, to the belief that it is just a problem of race. It is believed that Negroes have a special kind of singing, a special kind of voice, and that it is sufficient to belong to a race to formulate a special kind of music and of expression in singing. It is not easy to contradict that. It is generally believed that Negroes have a special attitude, more gift for music, that they just like to sing and to dance. I would contradict and would say, well, all people learn music and learn it from the specific background they have. A fine example is given to this in Africa itself, where 3-year-old boys are usually able to dance the most complicated dances. But among the African professors' children at the University of Ibadan, the 3-year-old boys cannot dance those dances because they have not been carried around by the rapper on the back of their mothers to dances through nights, sleeping and learning those rhythms, but because they have been taken around in a carriage. So they will not learn those complicated rhythms. So I think we have to drop off all these notions about racial differences. What makes the difference in cultures are value systems, as I have shown in other lectures. And when we want to know what is specific and specific for this kind of musical expression, we have to look to Africa and to African cultural background. We have not only to look to Africa. Negro spiritual, blues and jazz are expressions of a cultural mixture, have two stylistic roots, one African and one Euro-American, and out of these two influences, these expressions are a synthesis. If I stress in this lecture the African side, so because this is the one less known, the other side being rather well known. That is not jazz. The interpretation firstly of Negro spiritual, in America was double-fold. You know, in slavery times, there were two explanations why the slaves were singing. The slaveholders believed people who sing and dance are happy. And because of happiness, they sing and they dance. Because the society having the slaves, the slaveholders themselves, used to dance and to sing when they felt themselves well. The abolitionists, on the other side, had a different explanation. They were saying, well, these people sing sad songs about their lost liberty. It was a picture, as Harriet Beecher Stowe showed it in Uncle Tom, of people thinking exactly like abolitionists, believing exactly in the individual liberties of the 19th century, complaining their lost liberties. Is it really possible that people coming from Africa and getting to another continent into a different society should have felt like Europeans or people from New England? Did they have the same background? Asking this question is already saying no. They had not lost an individual liberty in Africa because in Africa they had never had individuals and never had individual liberties. In African society, there are no individuals, there are persons, which means that every person is ranked in a social system which gives status, gives responsibilities, and gives certain freedom with the equivalent of, as equivalent to responsibilities. So there were fixed in a society which was harmony and which tended towards a social harmony and did not know individual liberty, which means in this context being thrown out of the community. If we look at the imagery of the Negro spiritual, we constate several typical facts in it, in the texts. You know, the later explanation to the style of Negro spirituals was that on the one side, the texts reveal Christianity, and often they were considered as a revival of early Christianism, of intense Christianity. On the other side, it was contradicted that it was not so much Christianity in it, but a will for freedom, for revolution, and it was believed too that the Christianity was only a facade behind which a kind of a revolutionary spirit was expressed. Both explanations, again, see the whole phenomena in a way of Western thinking. It did as well not go back to the African background. If we think over what could have a slave thought when coming from an African society and thinking in African terms. We have some indications for that just in the spirituals. You have in most African societies the rite de passage, the initiation rites, where the person passes a stage in his life of special education, where the person has to die, is painted in white color, is put outside in a suffering, in the bush, in a suffering society, has to suffer and to learn for a certain time, even has often to learn a new language there. And this period of suffering is a guarantee for the liberation and redemption at the same time as a full member of the new society, of the grown-up people. The slave could see, and probably saw, his fate on the American continent in this way, to conceive it, to understand it as a rite de passage, a new one which it certainly disliked, in which he was thrown into a country of death, as in a rite de passage, among white dead people, among a kind of spirits, learning a new language, suffering, but suffering in a way to know that the suffering itself was just a guarantee for being finally accepted as a full member of the full community, to have, to put it in the African term, full magara, full life force and happiness in this world. The symbolism connected with it and seen in the spiritual just shows that. It is always their images of graveyard, of dying in this world, which after crossing the river, a rite which often happens in African communities, after the rite de passage, after crossing the water, will really get into the full life of the society, where then is given here a gown, a robe, and a waistband, and where he is allowed to sit down. Let me just give you an example of that. Sit down, servant, I can't sit down. Sit down, servant, I can't sit down. Sit down, servant, I can't sit down. My soul's so happy that I can't sit down. My lord, you know that you promise me a long white robe and a pair of shoes. Go yonder, angel, fetch me a pair of shoes. Place them on my servant's feet. Now, servant, please sit down. My lord, you know that you promise me a long white robe and a starry crown. Go yonder, angel, fetch me a starry crown. Place it on my servant's head. Now, servant, you sit down. My lord, you know that you promise me a long white robe and a golden waistband. Go yonder, angel, and fetch me a golden waistband. Place it round my servant's waist. Now, servant, you sit down. The sitting down, the waistband, the crown, all this are images which on the one side are coming from biblical background, but are in this context understood in the same way as it would be in an African background, to be now member of the full community, to sit down and to have rest. The way of expression here in these songs is a typical African behavior. It is what these spirituals and the blues mostly do. It is not a description of what is, but an evocation of what should be. The process in the Initiation rites and in Negro spiritual is that the song is the magic word to evocate the future, to make the future come in the moment, to project it from the future into the present. So it is not just a song of revolt. It is not just simply Christian. It is more than that. It is a magic way of expression. It is looking in the future, and what I want is presented as if it now happens, and by the emotion I put myself through special kind of music into motion and emotion up to ecstasies, so that I can feel that future of harmony, of universal harmony already now, and its healing effect on myself. So it is in this setup that we try now to see it, that like in the initiation rites in Africa, where the same happens, the future is in an evocation, in an evocative sense, brought to the group, to the person, not to the individual. Now, where comes the Christian image in, and in which sense comes the Christian image into it? In the African initiation rites, orishas, loas, that means specific spirits, are asked into action. As I said in another lecture, the nomo, the magic word, forces the god into action. The god has to come down. He is asked by a certain pattern of drums, by a specific rhythm. He is forced down into the human being who gets possessed by the deity. By this polymetrical music, which forces the individual into ecstasies, this is possible. And by the specific beat pattern of the drums, specific images, that means specific gods, are called down into action, fortify the human being, make his magara, his full being, bigger. As in North America, the slaves were not allowed to have drums, the traditional African gods could not be called into action, because they can only be called into action by quite specific beat patterns. They needed to be substituted. And there the Christian image comes in. The Negro spirituals deal with persons of the Bible. But what kind of persons are they? Noah, going over, saving, building the ark and going over the water in the ark, or arch, what's the pronunciation? Ark. Moses going over the Red Sea, over the water again, freeing the people. Let my people go. Joshua, who fought the Battle of Jericho, where the river Jordan is the separating water to come to the other side, to Zion. Daniel, didn't the Lord deliver Daniel? Ezekiel, Jesus, the chariot and the wheel. Ezekiel saw the wheel. All these images are images of crossing over, mostly crossing over water. They are used as African orishas, as African deities, completely in the same rank, one like the other, to make as a pattern of transition, of liberation and redemption in one. And they are all giving precisely the same image. So, this is not really Christianity. Whether Joshua or Noah or Ezekiel or Jesus or the wheel or the chariot, they say the same and they are in the same rank. It is not Christ in a special Christian function. It is in the function of the hero, of the paradigmatic hero. Is that a word? Yes, paradigmatic. Giving an example of redemption. So, the Christian hierarchy is not in the spiritual. It is the Orisha, the God, forced into action. And the attitude is that in the group finds liberation and redemption in the action of taking this image ecstatically in itself, having this redemption and liberation for the time of ecstasies, thus provoking it for the future. Psychologically, the Negro spiritual thus did not just say we want to be free, or did not adopt a Christian consolation of attitude, the attitude, the action in it follows an African tradition in Christian imagery. Of course, is there the obvious bridge towards Christianity. Because liberation, redemption, salvation have something in Christianity which could legitimately be linked to it. If then in Negro spirituals enter conceptions like sin, there you have obvious Christian influences, or devil. And we can then see at the specific, looking individually through the Negro spirituals, that these images, which are very Christian, normally do not appear in the first 2 or 3 verses of the spiritual, but later. There is a process, and a historical process, that with time the Negro spiritual becomes more and more really Christian. We can thus distinguish elder spirituals from newer spirituals. We have otherwise no indication. And we can say these verses must be older, and later other verses being added to it, which got more and more into a Christian ideology, if I can say so. Christian ideas more and more entered into it. So we see Negro spirituals in a historical process. If this African side is seen, the attitude in it becomes obvious just as well as in the blues, which is a parallel to it. What is the difference between Negro spiritual and blues? In the spiritual, a group uses a tool, the tool of singing, of music, to force deities down and to get as a group liberation and redemption in one. The blues is a parallel action of one individual, not of a group, but stands in the same context. The important difference between Christianity too is this, that in Christianity you have the possibility of mystic experience, which is often mixed up in the understanding, and which we often just mix up with magic behavior and expression. The Negro spiritual is magic, is not mystic. And Christianity, in the European sense, has a possibility of mystics. A mystic's experience is an individual experience. The human being opens himself to God and waits that God acts. It can only be an individual, single experience, and God is free to give this experience or to reject it. A magic experience, on the other side, forces the God into action, and the human being, by his magic word, spoken in as a group, forces the god into action, and his superior can force gods. And this is not very Christian, you will admit. And this is just what happens in Negro spiritual. Blues, I said, is a single reaction and a single attitude in the same sense, but not an individual one. Again here, we have a specific Africanity in it. In African poetry and African literature, the poet is a kind of a sorcerer. He causes action by the magic word. He says the word, as it is a magic word, it is always responsible and causes always reaction. He does not say what is, but specifically what should be. The description, if there is at all, is only a way of helping to re-establish the universal harmony, which is always in disorder and must be brought back into harmony, must be re-established. In blues, thus, happens something similar. But it is linked up and is westernized, while the African speaker speaks for the community and has really no audience, only participants, and there is the call and response always predominant. That means on the one side the poet and on the other side the so-called audience participating in every action. In blues there is only the performer, like in Western poetry, where there is a poet detached from the audience. But the detachment doesn't go as far as it is in the Western world. The experience the blues singer expresses is never his individual own experience as an individual, but as a person linked to the audience. It is always a typical experience which is shared by the audience and community. So, by the subject, the community participates. The style of the blues is, like in Negro spiritual, thus call and response, statement and response. When Leonard Bernstein once said, well, you just take 2 lines out of Shakespeare and you can make then, or you repeat the first line and then you have a blues, that's wrong. You cannot take any kind of classical Western or classical European poetry and just split it up to make blues with it. It's impossible. The blues has a specific law. It is statement and repetition of statement, perhaps, and then response, just in the same way as in the King's Praise Names in Dahomey. Statement and response. The response mostly answers to the question, why? After the statements, one statement which is repeated, there is the explanation why, the generalization. And this explanation gives the Magara relation. That means the relation to full life. I am so sad, there might be in the first parts as a statement, and then comes, because my girlfriend left me. It doesn't need to be said because. Just my woman left me and I am alone. I gambled away my money and I gambled away my check, but the same way I lost it, I shall get it back. Confrontation here, looking in the future what will happen, evocation of a happy, of a good future. So we have either explanation or confrontation. We have never an action which goes on. This makes it possible that the blues singer can improvise at all. About improvisation, there are many opinions there, and usually it is thought that improvisation just means that you do, and when you feel it you will do right, and that you are very free in improvisation. But just that is not the case. You can never improvise without having the strictest framework how to go on. Improvisation is only possible if a precise logic is there, which I call blues logic, how to make it. The blues singer himself does not necessarily need to know the rules. He knows them through experience because he has heard so often blues and know how the form is done, and after some time he can repeat in the same pattern. But the pattern is very strict and there are the strictest rules thinkable. The rule is this: after the statement, which he repeats, he reflects upon the statement, relating it with full Magara, with full life force, giving it the explanation. Always in a general sense, which is not individual, but holds for the whole community, for the whole group. Then he goes on adding a similar kind of statement and giving again the explanation or the confrontation to it, linked to full Magara, what it means for the full group. And there is never the necessity or the possibility to have a real end. There can be added as many verses, many strophes can be put on and on and on, because there is enough material for new statements. In all African and Afro-American poetry, you can start at a point and can end somewhere. You have never a closed form like a sonnet in Western tradition, because the human voice just joins in for a certain time the beat of the universe and gets out. And when you take a poem by Aimé Césaire, Cahiers de retour au pays natal, it is 72 printed pages. But wherever you take a part of it, it's always a full poem. It has to have this form of being only accompanying a basic beat, which is the beat of the universe. As the reflection in the response part of the blues always has to have a similar answer, it turns out then often to be a refrain. It can turn over, and mostly does, in a refrain. I want to show you here one of these. to give you just an example. That's Big Bill Brunsey in a very famous one. Is that right, like this? Or?
The song that I'm singing about, people you know is true. If you black and got to work for a living now, that's what they would say to you. They says, if you was white, you'd be all right. If you was brown, stick around. But as you black, oh brother, get back, get back, get back. I was in a place one night, they were all having fun. They was all buying beer and wine, but they would not sell me none. They said, if you was white, you'd be all right. If you was brown, stick around. But as you black, oh brother, get back, get back, get back. I went to an employment office. I got a number and I got in line. They called everybody's number, but they never did call mine. They said, if you was white, you'd be all right. If you was brown, you stick around. But as you black, oh brother, get back, get back, get back. Me and a man working side by side, this is what it meant. They was paying him $1 an hour, and they was paying me 50 cents. They said, if you was white, you'd be all right. If you was brown, stick around. But as you black, oh brother, get back, get back, get back. I built the country, and I fought for it too. Now I guess that you can see what a black man have to do. He says, if you was white, it's all right. If you brown, stick around. But as you black, oh brother, get back, get back, get back. I'll win sweet victory with my little ply and hoe. Now I want you to tell me, brother, what you're going to do about the old Jim Crow. Now if you was white, it's all right. If you brown, stick around. But if you black, brother, get back, get back, get back.
Certainly it is easy to add more and more strophe to this. Material there is enough, unfortunately. So you see, the general here in the refrain reflects always a whole group. I have been speaking now about the text and about the attitude in what is African in it. It is more than that. It is a musical side too and a musical influence. And terms like blues, which suggest that that music is sad, from what I said, are just wrong. The term blues is a wrong term. It was not made by Afro-Americans. It was made by Western observers. Because it is not sad. It is just evocating Magara. It is a way to give the person the full life force. It is evocative. And in the music, the so-called blue notes were the reason for the term. Blue notes were considered as something between major and minor, and as minor keys in Western music express more or less a sad sentiment. It was believed it must be sad music. But the tonality of blues and of spiritual, of course, and of jazz, has nothing to do at all with this kind of Western music, because it is based just on a different scale. And I want just short to demonstrate you this. If we have the Western scale, here is C, and then comes D, and then comes E, that's the full step, and then we have exactly a half step only to F. Then comes a full step interval, that brings us to G, and then it repeats from here, one full step, A, and one full step again, B, and a half step again, C. And that is our Western tonal ladder. And we think it's quite all right like this. And we believe even that all people should have the same because we find that only beautiful. And other kinds of tonalities we just think wrong. But the Afro-American ladder is different. C is exactly C. There we are. Now D is here. This ladder has 7 tones as well. But they have no half steps. They have 7 equal steps. That means D is 1/8 lower. E is 2/8 lower. F is 1/8 higher than that F. And then G exactly agrees. Then it goes on the same way again. A 1/8 lower, B 2/8 lower, and C 1/8 higher. Now, these two agree. The others all do not agree. You can play these on this tonal scale easily on a trumpet or on a violin or on any kind of instrument where you can really, and on the human voice especially, where you can precisely get out every tone. But you cannot do it on the piano. What happens now, trying to play this on a piano as an instrument with fixed tones? The D of 1/8 lower, well, the 1/8 is not too much difference. It's just dropped. Instead, it's played this D. The F 1/8 higher, well, is not too much difference too. Played this one. But here, 1/4 of a tone lower. That is a problem. It gets exactly between E and E flat. There. And this is a blue note. That is meant when then on the piano the E flat and the E are used at the same time. It is not major and it's not minor, and it's not meant to be in a modality of Western scale at all. It is just here this tone which isn't there. Same happens here. The A is used and the C is used, but here that again is this tone exactly between B and B flat. And there we are. It means that applying this tonality, the blues and jazz got the blue notes, which are here and here, and have nothing to do at all with those Western terms of major or minor. You see, it's only two notes, two tones, which are very different, but they make a big difference. And I give just here a small piece of European kind of melody, playing it first in the European way, and then showing it when the same melody is played with these notes.
23.
Here what? Now the next. Here it comes.
Steht 21.
No, that's not the one. Next one.
Steht 22.
Now. That was a European one. Now the same. Comes now.
23.
That's all the difference. That explains too why jazz has no success in West Africa. Because here you see is an African scale not used, but it's a mixture with which for us being used to hear it like this is a fascination. But in Africa it is nearer, but it just sounds wrong. You must imagine if we hear Mozart on a bad piano, it is much worse than if we hear a music we don't understand at all, let's say Japanese. Then we take it for granted that tones are different. But when we hear Mozart, our own music, just on a very bad tempered piano, then we don't dislike it really. So that happens to the African hearing jazz. In most cases, it hurts his ear because it's very near, but just not what it should be. So here, the contribution of that kind explains that here the blue notes have nothing to do with a certain sentiment. And so the terminology would have to be changed, but we are used to fixed terms, and so we go on using them. As a whole, I did not speak about jazz, but you can, and it's not my subject of tonight, but in jazz happens just the same. So that here the African influence too makes and contributes essentially to what jazz is. In the Western world, of course, jazz gets more and more away from Africa and gets more and more into a way of music which is based on classical Western expressions. It loses more and more of Africanisms. But they are there, and they have deeply influenced the whole Western world, especially as this kind of music is not only in North America. We have other mixtures in Latin America, specifically in Haiti, in Cuba, which since centuries was the melting point, and dances have come from Africa to Europe since many, many centuries as an influence from outside. They have come usually up to the 18th century via Cuba. The Sarabanda came from Cuba, where it got from Africa. Well, then a Spanish dance. The police disliked it. It was not allowed, being considered too obscene. Gentlemen dancing it were put on the galleys. Then it got to France, where it was considered not an African but a Spanish dance, became a dance of the court of the kings of France. In Germany, La Sarabande was a French dance. And in Poland, then later, the Saraband was a German dance. You see, so you can see where it came from. And it's the same with the fandango and with many, many dances coming through to Europe. And there was always a taking over, a continuous reinterpretation and changing of the dance, which never remained what it was before, changing it over into another culture. So what happens to jazz is just the same, that it slowly is changed and incorporated into another culture. For centuries, Cuba was the point from where, via Spain, these dances came to Europe. Later, in the 19th century, rather no dances came, but in the 20th, then they came, plenty of them. Some directly, the others via South America, tango argentino to France, the others via North America, since ragtime, North America, England to Europe. So the way is different, but in all this history, it's not the first time that Africa paid an enormous contribution to music and specifically to dance, to song, not only in a musical way, but especially too in expression. And so, if I stressed only the African side of the Negro spiritual and of the blues today, I agree with you that there is another side as well, but that you know better than I do. So I only tried to stress here the African side of it because it is mostly forgotten. I thank you.
I want to thank Mr. Jahn for giving us a very interesting lecture on the origins of the spiritual and the blues. And before Mr. Jahn came to the lecture, I asked him if he'd like to have questions. He said enthusiastically, by all means, I enjoy answering questions much better than I do lecturing. So if you have some questions to ask Mr. Jahn, we'd be very glad to respond to them.
Yes, please.
You were mentioning Mandara, whole right. You said that the Negro, he was looking ahead and wishing the thing that he wanted in the future for now. Is that right?
Yeah.
I didn't quite understand in your example, when I've heard others too, why he would be wishing, unless perhaps he does, for what the last verse of that song said. I mean, the white's all right, the brown stick around, the black get back to back.
Oh no, he didn't wish that at all. That's just the irony of it.
Well,
you see.
I don't understand him, because it doesn't follow. I mean, he doesn't do that anymore. He doesn't wish for what he and sing that in a song, and sing what he would want in a song, rather than what,
You see, here you have it obvious that that is not what he wants, that what he dislikes. Yeah, yeah. No, here not. What I said does not refer to the blues in all, but especially to the spiritual. You see, here, that is the original, in the Negro spiritual, we have that, the wish, the redemption. In the blues, which is much more in the tradition, as I said, of the praise and mock song of African tradition, there is a lot of mockery, and that is mock. That is not his wish that it is like this. And I think that's quite obvious. Yeah. Please.
I'm wondering if that scale that John clarified the sort of mystery about the blues. You have a situation where an entire people, so to speak, are taken away from a homeland which, however, is a divided homeland. The Negroes who came here as slaves were not either ethnically or linguistically homogeneous. They came here with different customs. They're really different people, ethnically and anthropologically. They had different beliefs and different music. Possibly with the same scale, I don't know. The only thing in common generally was geography. They came generally from Western Africa, but nevertheless, within that same geography, they came here with different languages and different music. So the mystery is, how did the blues evolve such a specific, almost rigid form? And not only that, but the Negroes that came here from these different countries were dispersed throughout the United States. In Tennessee, Georgia, and so on. There was not an opportunity, so to speak, for them to have a convention to decide what form the blues should take. There was no get-together, and yet despite this separation, both in their ethnic background and in their physical placement here, despite this, mysteriously the blues evolved as in other words, a Negro from Texas and a Negro from Georgia could communicate in the blues and know exactly what's going on, despite these tremendous differences in background.
Well, the differences are not so tremendous, as I showed in other lectures here, for example, on African art. And you see, you have here in music the same phenomena, and I thank you very much for this question. You see the same in Haiti, where much more Africanities have been conserved, that just only the differences between the different African people were dropped. But what they had in common, for example, like a tonal scale, what they had in common is that all West African, at least West African, even East African, music, it has call and response scheme. That the praise songs have this Y in Africa. For example, I just quote from memory, the X does an X which is not sharp, the other X cannot cut, it is not sharp enough. See, why does it not cut? This pattern in African verse, especially in praise and mock verses, is just in common. So that what came out on the American continent was that these typical reactions, the typical way of dealing with deities which are common for the African societies, came out here as the only pattern. All patterns which disagreed were dropped. The others which agreed cross-culturally inside Africa, they were kept and even strengthened.
And even what?
Even strengthened, more strong, more precisely expressed. Yes, please.
I've been doing some research on Negro music in the 19th century, and I find that the kind of lyric which we call blues doesn't go back much before about 1890. Before that, the residual repertoire that's recorded consists of the kind of thing that's sometimes called minstrel music, the kind of songs the Leadbelly sang, such as Janheinz Jahn Playberry songs, this type of thing. I wonder if you consider that your call and response theory holds in this kind of material too, which seems to go back farther than the blues in America.
Well, I'm sorry that I cannot answer this question. I should need to have here my assistant, Dr. Dauer, who is a musicologist and here in my institute does that. And he has specially done now studies into the minstrelsy. and that will come out. I could not, what I'm giving here in music, I can in detail, not historically, go back myself. But you will get that soon printed. On the other hand, I link it up as far as texts are concerned and see the parallels quite evidently with the West African patterns, and they are there. We are very at a loss because in the beginning 19th century there were no tape recorders, and we do not really know what was precisely going on in many cases. We have to conclude and have to guess how old spirituals and blues might be, and the role of the minstrelsy is clearer, but I'm sorry, I don't know much about it. Yes, please, give us. No? Yeah.
The song that he referred to, I'm familiar with, Julianne Johnson. It is a Colin Nancy song.
Yeah.
Miss Julianne Johnson, oh Lord, Miss Julianne Johnson, oh Lord. The oh Lord,
yeah.
The way Leadbelly sings is in a different voice. It's somebody else commenting, joining in, participating. Yeah. It's a line that's reading A and B, and B is the answer to A.
Yeah.
That is a Colin Nancy song in
yeah.
its very form.
Yeah. Well, the call and response scheme goes through all. And only in blues, it's a blues singer himself who gives the answer. In the spiritual, it's a community still, like in the African way. You had a question.
Two questions. Would you tell me what development this African music has taken in the Caribbean and the French Caribbean, especially Martinique and Guadeloupe, where the influence was, of course, Western also, from a slightly different tradition from North America?
Yes, we have there variations, and they are considerable, because especially in the Caribbean, whether in Haiti or in Guadeloupe or Martinique, the drums were allowed. And that makes a lot of difference, because there the another rhythmic was conserved, the African rhythmic of polymetry. Polymetrics is a different kind of, is a specific kind of rhythmic, which makes it possible to call the orisha directly. So the loa in Haiti and in the French islands were conserved and can still be called into action. It was not the necessity there to substitute it by biblical images.
That's why the voodoo probably was.
Exactly. You see, the technique in the voodoo is this. The polymetrics, here you have polyrhythmic connected with this music. That means inside a meter the rhythm shifts. Here in Haiti, you have still the African type of clean polymetrics. A meter is like 3/4, and another meter is 4/4, for example, and another meter would be 5/4, and so on, different. Now, in Western music, the general pattern is that you have 1 meter, and you can write a whole symphony in 1 meter and develop the melody. So in orchestra, you can, through your bars, through the whole page when it is necessary. In polymetric music, you play different meters at the same time. And you have specific beat patterns in every meter which add up, which you can then add together to a specific beat pattern which results from it. It is very difficult for a Westerner to hear it. Do you want to hear it for a polymetric music? Just a piece of Igbo music which is polymetric. It starts, you see, I want to describe it first. It starts In polymetric music, if there are different meters at the same time, the instruments can never begin together. One has to start, then the next joins in, has to find the correct place, and then the next joins in again, and so on. The dancer, the observer, let's say, he is not an observer, he is a person brought into motion, and emotion adds up two different meters to one pattern. So you have in Vodou, for example, here out of, let's say, this and this meter, you have dancer 1, which is then possessed by a specific law. Dancer 2 adds, let's say, up these two, and dancer 3 adds up these two. So out of 3 drums, you get three different dances, which can precisely be controlled by the priest, because by a beat of the asson, he changes one of these drums, and then they wake up immediately. The loa, who is not wished, gets a bossal, that means go away, by this beat and is sent off. Now here, original African piece of polymetric music. That's it. Here, dum, 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 dum. The instrument does nothing than that. And so on. For the Western observer in the last century, when he heard such music, he didn't consider it as music at all, but just as noise. You see, he was not able to distinguish the different meters and to hear at all a music of that. And when I observed you now, during hearing this, those who were moving already did mostly only observe one instrument out of it. You see? Not the others. And the phenomenon of African dance is in contrast to Western dance. It is not monocentric, but polycentric. That means a part of the body moves according to the one, and another part of the body according to the other instrument. And that makes what gets you into ecstasies. As soon as you cannot do that, you see, then you are lost. Please.
Well, I've observed this in Western children responding to his dad. Does it? She will move a body in one direction and another part of her body in another direction.
Yes, but in jazz, in modern jazz, there is no polymetric music.
Oh, yes,
No, it is polyrhythmic. That means you have in 1 meter a shift inside the meter. You see, when let's say have a meter like this, 4/4. And then you have here beat 1, 2, 3, 4, let's say, and then comes the bar 1, 2, 3, 4. Now you can count, normal count, monometric is 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. But when you start now, polymetric music starts doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And there you have that shift you mean. That is still, that's a middle between. That is not polymetric, it is polyrhythmic. The distinction is important because in polyrhythmic music, as rock and roll and so on, you can get into a mass ecstasy, but it's not anymore controllable. You see, the African music with the polymetric music is controllable. By 1 beat you wake the people up, and they're not. That's the difference. Please.
Could you explain why in Afro-American society in Latin America, 3 drums seem to be the tradition?
See?
3 drums seem to be the tradition.
Yes.
Afro-American.
3 drums are the necessity, rather, to get in polymetric music to a stable result, as I have shown here. 4 meters at the same time are rather not possible, because then they get very difficult to distinguish. In African orchestras, you have up to 3 different meters at the same time. If you have more instruments, there are groups, where groups of, let's say, 2 or 4 drums, 2 to 4 drums are all beating meter 1, and another 2 to 4 drums beating meter 2, and another 2 to 4 drums beating meter 3. You seldom have more meters. But what is essential, what you absolutely need for causing this kind of religious ceremony are 3 different meters. And there at least are 3 drums necessary. And as here, again, as you said before in your question, the African influence is reduced to just what is essentially necessary. So you have, especially in the Afro-Caribbean and Afro-Brazilian ceremonies, just the 3 drums. They are essentially necessary.
Impose upon you long time. You wish to take another.
Oh, well, yes, he says one.
Suppose we take, say, 2 more questions arbitrarily, and then let Mr. Jahn finish with his performance for the night.
To return to the Negro spiritual, was the process of creation of circumstances without the African and the gradual, perhaps, dropping of some of the African influence. In your researches, have you been interested in finding places that haven't been subject to the changes and that have kept the, or that illustrate the older type of thing?
I have recently got, just on this lecture tour, very interesting material, which was so interesting that I didn't keep it with me, but sent it immediately home for research into it, from the delta of the Mississippi. I got that by a professor of University of Iowa, who had spent 15 years there and has discovered their whole community still speaking French, and French spirituals in the United States still living from the last century. Very early, obviously, very early material.
Does this apply to the Virgin Sea Islands at all?
I don't know, but I think there are as well. They were from a place called Angola in the Mississippi Delta, and out of that region. One more question? No? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, all right. Thank you.